Good afternoon. This is the Tropical Outlook and Discussion product for Monday, August 15th, 2022. The current time is 5:23 p.m. Central Daylight Time. Taking a wide look across the tropical Atlantic, a lack of activity is predominant across the northern hemisphere at this point in time. This is largely resulting from the placement of from a tropospheric upper level trough that is located in this general vicinity right here, which is stonewalling any type of activity that tries to progress in east to west fashion across the main development region. However, the presence of a little bit of convection located down here could be the focal point as we progress through the period and encroach on the end of the month. And that needs to be watched pretty closely. Temperatures in these regions, as far as sea surface temperatures go, are quite appreciable, especially as you get into the eastern Caribbean and western Atlantic. And those areas are focal points that we're going to need to kind of keep an eye on as we progress through the period, get into the end of August and early September. We're going to push in now and we're going to take a look at the National Hurricane Center and their forecast products, which indicate that there is nothing in the way of tropical cyclone activity expected during the next 48 hours, and that actually extends out to the next 5 days. However, I think in the coming days, you might start to see some areas of interest that start to show up in this product, particularly in this main region right here, which is starting to show some pretty consistent signals of repping some sort of activity, especially as we encroach into the last week of August. And then obviously we're going to have to see how this translates down the rails, so to speak, and we get into the early part of September. Now, a lot of questions have come up, and I've been presented with a few questions here and there regarding what exactly is going on in the Atlantic. We've had all these informational discharges stating that we're going to have this hyperactive season, we're going to have this overly active season, and we have been about 5 weeks without a named system, and we're only 2 letters in. The next system, and I realize that the next named system is going to be Danielle. However, one of the systems was Colin, and that was off the coast of the Carolinas, which was a system, but not really a system, in my personal opinion, just based off of the meteorology associated with it. However, it was present and obviously warranted nomenclature per the National Hurricane Center. However, looking at that and considering how short-lived that system was, kind of a one that slipped away in my personal opinion. However, we're going to move on, and the next named system for the Atlantic tropical season is going to be Danielle. We're going to move in here and we're going to take a look now, and this is the tropical cyclone probabilities, and that's one of the main products that are being used by the National Hurricane Center as far as mid-range outlooks go. However, this product here is from 0 to 48 hours, and you start to show a little bit of interest right in this area, right off the Cape in Africa, right as it starts to enter the main development region. This is an area that is of a tremendous amount of concern, considering that there are some really mature systems that look progged to exit Africa and enter the Atlantic, and these could really translate down the pipe to be something of interest, especially for people in Barbados, Grenada, Lesser Antilles, get into Jamaica, Haiti, and areas like that in the Caribbean. These are systems that are probably going to need to be watched as we get a week, 2 weeks down the road. However, at this point in time, for 48 hours, the probabilities are 10 to 12% at the maxima, and that is right off the coast. And we're going to have to see how this translates. Moving in, we're going to take a look at the Global Tropical Hazards and Benefits Outlook from the Climatological Prediction Center. And as you see right here, this is the week we're about to close out. This is August 10th to August 16th, 2022. Not a lot going on. However, we're starting to see some signs that are going to indicate that there is a potential change underway. First one's the one I'm circling right here, and you're starting to see some of the higher precip possibilities based off of the precipitation anomalies being in the upper third of historical, and that is something that needs to be watched. Those are the lead ups to tropical systems, and obviously, if you have abnormally dry conditions or anomalously dry conditions in those areas, You just don't have the fuel or impetus for tropical development. However, if we take a look at week 2 and we start to see a little bit of area here, and this is becoming more broad, and even a delineation in this general area right here of tropical cyclone development in that area. And based off of what I've been seeing as far as trend analysis goes, I would be inclined to concur with this. And it's ultimately going to matter how the tropospheric upper level trough breaks down across the tropics, especially in the Western Atlantic and Eastern Caribbean. And I do think that goes away. It's just going to take a little bit of time or a system to come through. And that's one of the keys to keep in mind here is with the main development region starting to show activity. If we can get a cyclone to root in there and push through that, it's really going to help disintegrate that trough, and that's going to open up the Atlantic for business. Moving on, we're going to take a look at the sea surface temperatures, and the sea surface temperatures as a result of the semi-tropical system, more of a hybrid system in my personal opinion. If it had an extra day or two over water, probably would have become a relatively potent system considering it's dealing with water temperatures in the 29 to 30 degrees Celsius range. That's in vicinity of 86 to 87, 88 degrees. Some areas 89, 90, and that's the west coast of Florida, the northern coast of Texas, and extending through the western coast of Louisiana. You can see some of these temperatures out here in this general area are a little bit cooler. And while that might be of concern to somebody who's not following this as adamantly as I am, that is a result of upwelling and a result of rain-cooled water being discharged into the Gulf of Mexico. That sea surface right there, if you look at the bottoms, are relatively shallow, and that will flip switch very, very quickly. I would estimate probably 2 to 4 days before that starts to moderate as well. But even with this cooler water being here, this is still conducive for development. So definitely a primed and ready Gulf of Mexico, and is ready and waiting for a system. We're going to take a look here at the GFS model outputs, and this is the 18Z product. We're actually going to back up. We're going to take a look at the 12Z, as that's a completed operational run. And we're going to take a look here, and you can actually see the tropospheric upper level trough that's right here right now. And this is what's been a big player in some of these little feeble waves that try to come off the coast of Africa and traverse across. As you notice, with a low pressure center, there is a counterclockwise circulation, and that just shears any systems that get in here apart. So that's been largely problematic for many of these waves that emerge off the western coast of Africa, being able to survive their transit across the Atlantic and get into the Caribbean, where much more favorable conditions exist in this area. Now, with the evolution of the pattern, we're going to take a look through this here as I push through the model data. You can notice by looking at the wind barbs here that this wanes. Now, this indicates that the Western Atlantic and Eastern Caribbean are very soon going to be open to business. Now, here's the whole key to this, is right now, the GFS has not been performing very well. None of the model suites, as a matter of fact, have been performing very well at all. However, they're starting to lock onto some patterns, and I'm starting to see some similarities across global members. The GFS and the Euro, to some degree, are starting to show a little bit of agreement, and that's run to run. I've noticed that's been pretty much the case for about the past 4 to 5 days. That's good. That lends credence to the fact that there may be a pattern evolution underway. So that's something that we got to watch. Now, as this breaks down, this is going to allow a conveyor to open up out of the main development region. But there are several areas that need to be watched in this. And number one is obviously this main development region. Number two, the Central American gyre, while it's present, not really intense, but it doesn't take a lot this time of the year. And that's generally just an upper level low pressure that's right here. And a piece of energy could shoot off of that, kind of thread the needle between the Yucatan and the western coast of Cuba, enter the Gulf of Mexico. And if it is able to get into the Gulf of Mexico, that's going to be a big problem. A lot of latent energy, reduced wind shear, which has been present all season long across the Gulf of Mexico, basically makes the Gulf of Mexico a pool of gasoline any type of tropical system gets in, there's a match, and then there's a big problem ahead. So as it stands right now, nothing imminent, nothing to worry about, but times are changing, and we're starting to see the winds of change are starting to blow in, and we're going to start to see what I think is going to be a very gradual uptick in tropical cyclone activity. Now, obviously, this could go either way. I've had questions also asked, is like, could this be a season that we get by and we don't see a landfalling U.S. hurricane? It's possible. It is very possible. Do I think it's likely? No. I think it's more likely that we're looking at a backloaded season when it comes down to this. So take the additional time to keep your preparedness high, be ready, cover safety tips, look for evacuation routes, especially if you reside along the Gulf of Mexico in any area. And I think the entire area, coast of Texas from Brownsville all the way to Miami, all the way up into the Carolinas, I think any of those areas could be impacted at some point this year. And it would be a good idea to just review those safety guidelines just in the event that something crops up. Taking a look here, this is the tropical heat, upper ocean heat content. And when we take a look at the UOHC, notice a lot of latent energy is present. And there's a lot of latent energy across the Caribbean. The Gulf of Mexico is open for business. And the last time we looked at this wasn't nearly this remarkably big. And that is a lot of fuel. That's a lot of juice. And if systems can get into that, they're really going to take on a life of their own. So just something to kind of keep in mind as we move through the period. Next, this is the MJO, the Madden Julian oscillation forecast product for the period from now all the way into the 40-day range, which would take us through into the last third of September. This is showing some very interesting characteristics as well. As you notice right now, there's a stark lack of tropical activity across the Gulf of Mexico, the Caribbean, and really, in all honesty, the entire Atlantic. And that's repped very, very well by this product here. As you see here, this is an anomalous area of higher pressure, lower precip, not a lot of activity. Obviously, high pressure, sinking air, you can't really get any parcels to become buoyant, can't get any development with that. Lower pressure, a little bit more moist regime, rising parcels, and can allow for convection and development. But we notice right here for this period, and this goes out to early September, and I really don't think it's going to last that long, but that's what this output's saying, so we're just going to reflect and cover what this says. But if you take a look here and we get into September, these are the areas that we need to be watching for development. And notice these greens starting to show up. These are areas that are going to be experiencing precipitation, which is indicative of lower pressure and higher tropical probabilities. And it looks like we're about to set up, if this MJO product serves right and proves to be true, we're about ready to set up for an extended backloaded season. So it's something to kind of keep in the back of your head as we transgress through the period. Moving on, we're going to take a look at the Ensemble products, and these are some pretty interesting products to look at. And we're going to first look at what I believe is the most conservative, and that is going to be the ECMWF, or the Euro Ensembles. And we're going to take a look through the period, and this extends out through the third week of August and gets into last week. This takes us out to about the 29th. And we take a look here and start to notice a lot in the way, we're going to move forward through this. Notice a lot in the way of lower pressures starting to show in that conveyor belt that covers the main development region right in here. Also, the other thing to notice is the Caribbean's starting to light up a little bit. This would serve as a key indicator that the main development region activity is pushing through, eliminates that tropospheric upper level trough, and gets that out of the way. And that just allows for these systems to have a free path to be able to make it into the Caribbean, where they can really gain some action and really gain some intensity. So just something to kind of keep in mind. And it looks like there's a pretty steady stream of these as the MDR starts to migrate to higher latitudes and moves out of the equatorial region. This really starts to light up. So that's something to just kind of keep an eye on as we move through. Now we're going to take a look at we're going to take a look at the GEFS, or the Global Forecasting Systems Ensemble members. And this one here is really, really interesting and kind of what's been expected by me, at least. However, the GFS has a real high tendency of playing the backside of these things in the highest level of fantasy. So we're going to take a look at this. Just some food for thought, nothing imminent. So we'll just keep that in mind. And we start to see a lot of brightening down in here, a lot of lower pressures starting to show up. And what's particularly concerning about this, if we take a look here, we're going to pause this and we're going to bump this forward. And we get to the backside of this, and this is a lot of activity starting to show up over the Gulf and Caribbean. And the main development region's still clinging on to activity. Obviously, this would be wake stability in the wake of these systems moving into the Caribbean and potentially Gulf of Mexico. Does this have traction? Right now, I'm not inclined to say that this has a lot of traction. However, the possibility is there, and it's starting to rep in some degree. The timeline is off a little bit, but it's starting to rep the same activity that's being shown on the euro. So if we bump back and we take a look at the euro all the way out, and let's take a look at that, notice these start to brighten up at about the same time as you start to see this. Now, obviously, there's a little bit of a westward bias with the GEFS from the EPS, or the Euro ensembles, but still there's activity being repped through both suites. And if you remember back in July, late June, early July, when we were looking at this, you weren't really seeing that type of consistency. You're seeing the GEFS would play it really hard. The Euro would be like, no, there's nothing going on there. And vice versa. You would see that kind of toggle back and forth, back and forth. And now we're starting to see a consistent rep. So having consistent reps amongst global members, which is what we're seeing here, is starting to kind of lend suspicion to what's going on. And the fact that we may be getting ready to enter a pretty active stretch looks better than it did before. So moving forward, just something to keep in mind, that all this is preliminary, and there's a lot of this stuff that's out in fantasy range right now, and we need to just kind of keep an eye on it as we move forward through the period. However, this is the time. This is the time that we're going to start to see stuff, and when things happen, they can happen with 2 to 3 days notice. I was using Hurricane Laura as a barometer, and when we started to look at Laura really take on a life of its own and really become an imminent high-level threat, that took about 2.5 days to really get itself going. And it was merely a low-grade tropical system as it entered the Eastern Caribbean, and it made landfall as a 150-mile-an-hour Category 4 hurricane 2.5 days later. So what right now, when we're taking a look at this doesn't mean, okay, I need to raise my guard in a week and a half, 2 weeks. It means right now you need to be on guard. I'm watching systems repeatedly. I'm watching the conditions across the Gulf of Mexico, the Caribbean, and the Western Atlantic very carefully, multiple times a day. And we're starting to get to that area where we could see shotgun development. You could see something break off of the Central American gyre out here. And that's what you're seeing with this system here, this system here. It's being repped. Obviously, this is fantasy, but the possibilities there, the models are locking on to the possibilities of these happening. This right here would be a system that migrates through the MDR and starts to gain latitude slowly as it starts to close in on the Bahamas, the Antilles, and looks like, I mean, at least per this, if this has a tendency and shows a tendency over time to thread the needle between the northern coast of Cuba and the southern coast of Florida, this is the path that Laura took. And I mean, I could get in there and enter some really good latent energy here, a lot of warmth in there, reduced wind shear, and it could really go crazy in a very short amount of time. So this has got to be watched very closely as we move through the period. And I think this does have what's perhaps the most realistic play out of this year so far with respect to this model set. However, this is all preliminary, and we need to just kind of keep an eye on this as we move forward through the period. So in closing, just something to keep in mind. We'll take another look at this here in the next couple days, 2 to 3 days, or as soon as I see something that shows a lot of interest, we will take a look at this. However, right now, just keep your guard high, keep your heads on your shoulders, and we're just going to kind of keep an eye out, and we're going to see how things take care. We'll be back with more later. Thank you for tuning in. Talk to you soon. Take care of yourselves and each other.